"I'll leave at dawn," said the rejected mail-order bride. The rancher barred the door. Not alone. The wind reached the homestead before the wagon did. It slid across the open ground with a low whistle, lifting dust and dry leaves, pressing them against the rough plank walls as if testing their resolve. By the time the wagon stopped, the house already knew someone had come who might not stay. Eliza Moore stepped down carefully, boots touching earth that felt firmer than the road behind her. She did not rush. She never did anymore. Rushing had once cost her everything. Her daughter, Lillian, climbed down next, clutching a cloth doll missing one button eye. Her son, Thomas, followed, quiet and watchful, already learning how to read a room before speaking in it. The ranch stood alone, a long mile from the nearest fence line. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin but steady. Someone was home. That knowledge settled in Eliza's chest, heavy and uncertain. She smoothed her coat, though the wind undid the effort at once. Then she took the folded paper from her pocket, the letter that had carried her west. Not romance, not promises, just clear words, written by a man who said he needed help and offered steadiness in return. She had answered honestly. A widow, 2 children, no illusions. The door opened before she could knock. Jonah Reed stood in the frame, taller than she expected, shoulders held stiff as if bracing against weather that never fully passed. He did not smile. He did not scowl. His eyes moved first to the children, then back to her face, as though counting costs he had hoped were already paid. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind filled the silence, rattling the loose hinge on the porch gate. "You're early," Jonah said at last. Eliza nodded. The road allowed it. That was all. She did not explain the cold nights, or the driver who wanted extra money she didn't have, or how Lillian had cried herself to sleep the last 2 evenings from pure exhaustion. Some things were not introductions. Jonah stepped aside enough to let them in, but not enough to invite them forward. His hand stayed on the doorframe. His knuckles were scarred, old marks that spoke of work done alone. Inside, the house smelled of coffee grounds and with smoke. Clean, but spare. One chair pulled close to the stove. Another pushed back and used. "I can offer supper," he said, "and a place to sleep. Tonight." The word landed where it could not be ignored. Eliza met his gaze. She had prepared for this. Hope, she had learned, was strongest when it traveled light. "That's kind of you," she said evenly. "We'll be grateful." They ate quietly. The children chewed with care, sensing the weight in the room. Jonah watched them without meaning to, noticing how Thomas passed the bread to his sister before taking his own, how Eliza folded her napkin when she was finished, even though no one else had. Afterward, he showed them the small back room, 2 narrow beds, a single window that faced the rising slope behind the house. "I'll leave at dawn," Eliza said, her voice steady, not defiant, not pleading, simply true. Jonah turned as if struck. "You don't have to." "I do," she said gently. "You offered honesty in your letters. I owe you the same." That night, the house did not sleep easily. The wind pressed harder, carrying the distant bark of a coyote in the long, aching quiet that followed. Eliza lay awake, listening to her children breathe, wondering how many beginnings a person was allowed before the world stopped offering them. In the other room, Jonah sat at the table long after the lamp dimmed. He stared at the grain of the wood, at a dark ring left by a cup years ago. He had built this life to be manageable, predictable. He had not accounted for the way the children's shadows had stretched across his floor, or how Eliza's voice had not shaken when she said she would go. When the first light crept through the windows, Eliza rose. She dressed the children quietly. She lifted her bag, light enough to be carried but heavy with all she could not leave behind. Her hand rested on the latch. Behind her, a chair scraped against the floor. The door opened, not outward, but wide. Jonah stood there, hat in his hands, the morning light showing every tired line in his face. "Don't leave," he said. She turned cautious now. "Ready?" Not like that, he added. Not alone. The wind paused just for a breath, as if waiting to hear what would come next. Morning settled slowly over the ranch, pale light stretching across the floorboards like it was learning the space for the first time. The kettle sang again, softer now, and the smell of coffee returned, familiar but changed. Eliza stood near the table, her bag still at her feet, unsure whether to lift it again or finally let it rest. Jonah moved first. He set another cup on the table, then another. His hand shook just enough to notice. He cleared his throat. I don't know how to do this right, he said, not looking at her. I only know how to do it honest. Eliza studied him the way a person studies weather before deciding to travel, not searching for perfection, searching for truth. Thomas appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled, eyes alert. Lillian followed, rubbing sleep from one eye, doll tucked beneath her arm. They stopped when they saw Jonah standing there, unsure if this morning belonged to them. Jonah knelt down slowly, so he wasn't towering. Morning, he said. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, but not unwelcome. There's bread left, and apples. Lillian looked to her mother before nodding. Thomas said nothing, but his shoulders eased a fraction. Breakfast passed with more sound than the night before. Cups touching wood, a chair scraping, wind slipping through a crack near the window. Outside, a horse snorted, impatient to be fed. Afterward, Jonah reached for his coat. There's work, he said. Always is. You're welcome to watch. Or help. Or just rest. Eliza considered this. Rest had become a word she didn't quite trust. Still, she nodded. I'll help where I can. The day unfolded in pieces. Jonah showed Thomas how to scatter grain without startling the chickens. He showed Lillian where the warm stones lay near the barn wall and warned her which boards creaked. Eliza swept the porch, then the floor inside, not because it needed it, but because motion calmed her thoughts. Neighbors did not arrive. The land was too spread out for casual visits. But the sense of being watched lingered, not by people, but by the place itself, measuring whether these new shapes belonged. By midday, clouds gathered low. The air shifted, carrying the promise of rain. Jonah paused near the fence, glancing toward the house. Eliza stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back with care. You don't have to prove anything, he said when she joined him. I know, she replied, but I want to. That afternoon, a wagon appeared on the far road. It did not stop. It passed slowly, a reminder that the world still moved beyond this stretch of land. Eliza watched it until it disappeared, wondering who inside it was running toward something or away. That night, supper tasted warmer. Jonah spoke more, not about the past, but about fences that needed mending and a well that ran low in August. Eliza listened, asking questions that mattered. When the children slept, Jonah stood by the window again. You can stay, he said quietly now, for good, if you choose it. But I won't pretend this place hasn't been lonely. It will take time. Eliza joined him, the dark land stretching out before them. Time, she said. We have some. Outside, rain finally fell. Soft, steady, the kind that soaks in rather than washes away. But somewhere beyond the hills, a decision made long ago was still catching up with them. And when it did, it would test whether staying was braver than leaving. The rain worked its way into everything. It darkened the soil, softened the boards, and drew a deeper scent from the earth that lingered even after the clouds pulled away. By the third morning, the land looked changed, not renewed exactly, but more willing, as if it had decided to listen before judging. Eliza noticed a difference first in the quiet. Not the hollow quiet she had lived with before, but one that held space. Space for footsteps. Space for voices that might come later. Jonah spent that morning along the lower fence line, where posts leaned from years of settling and weather. He worked slower than he once had, not from weakness, but awareness. Thomas followed him at a careful distance, holding a pouch of nails like it was something important enough to deserve both hands. Jonah drove a nail, paused, checked a line, then drove another. Thomas watched every movement, eyes narrowed in concentration, learning the rhythm before trusting his own voice. "Why does that one lean?" Thomas finally asked, pointing to a crooked post. Jonah rested his hammer against his leg. "Because it was set in a hurry," he said. "Looked fine at first. But time tells on things that aren't rooted right." Thomas considered that. He nodded once, not because he fully understood, but because it felt true. Near the house, Eliza knelt beside the narrow garden bed that had been left untouched for 2 seasons. The rain had softened the soil just enough. Lillian crouched beside her, sleeves rolled too far back, fingers already dark with earth. "These ones need space," Eliza said, pressing seeds into ground with her thumb. "They grow better when they don't crowd each other." Lillian frowned. "Like people?" Eliza smiled, surprised. "Yes," she said, "like people." The day passed in small labors. A hinge tightened, a bucket carried, a floor swept not because it was dirty, but because care leaves marks of its own. No one spoke much, but no one felt ignored either. That was new. By afternoon, a rider appeared on the distant rise. He did not approach right away. He paused, surveying the land, then continued down the road. Jonah watched him longer than necessary. "Someone you know?" Eliza asked, joining him on the porch. Jonah shook his head. "Just someone passing through. Folks don't stop unless they have reason." Eliza glanced back at the house, at the children inside. "Sometimes," she said, "people don't stop because they're afraid of needing to." That evening, Jonah brought out a small wooden box from beneath his bed. He set it on the table after supper, his movements careful. "These were my wife's," he said. Inside were sewing needles wrapped in cloth, a ribbon faded by sun, a single photograph curled at the edges. He did not look at Eliza when he added, "I kept the house the same after she died. Thought changing it would mean forgetting." Eliza touched the ribbon lightly. "Memory doesn't live in objects," she said. "It lives in what we choose to carry forward." Jonah exhaled slowly, like someone setting down a weight he hadn't known he was still holding. Later, after the children slept, the wind rose again, but gentler now. Jonah stood at the window out of habit, then stopped himself. He turned instead toward the table, toward the light, toward the sound of another person breathing in the room. Outside, the fence held. Inside, something else was learning, too. But change, Eliza knew, always draws attention. And attention has a way of arriving before you're ready for it. Attention arrived 2 mornings later, carried on the sound of wheels long before the wagon itself came into view. Eliza heard it while hanging damp clothes along the line, the wood pins cool in her fingers. The rhythm was wrong for Jonah's work wagon. Too light, too careful. She paused, listened again. Jonah was at the trough, brushing with the horses. He heard it too, his hand stilled, resting against the animal's warm neck. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wagon crested the rise and rolled closer, its paint faded but cared for, the driver sitting straight despite the rutted ground. A woman held the reins. Beside her sat a boy, perhaps 10, swinging his legs, curious rather than wary. Jonah wiped his hands on his trousers and walked forward, stopping a respectful distance from the road. Eliza stayed near the porch, not hiding, but not advancing either. Thomas and Lillian watched from the doorway, their heads close together. The wagon stopped. "Mornin'," the woman called. Her voice was firm, practiced. "Names," Ruth called her. "We got a place 2 miles east. I saw smoke the other day. Thought I'd introduce myself." Jonah nodded. "Jonah Reed." Ruth's gaze flicked briefly to the house, then to Eliza. She smiled, not unkindly, but with the sharp curiosity of someone who noticed changes. "Didn't know you had company," Ruth said. Jonah hesitated. Eliza felt the pause like a held breath. "They're staying," Jonah said finally. Not loudly, not defensively, just stated. Ruth studied him for a beat longer, then nodded. "Well," she said, "that's good to hear." She turned her attention to Eliza. "It's a hard stretch of land. Easier when there's more than one set of hands." Eliza stepped forward then, meeting her halfway. "Eliza Moore," she said, "thank you for stopping." Ruth smiled again, warmer this time. "We'll have supper on Sundays, once the weather settles." "You're welcome." It wasn't an invitation wrapped in obligation, just an opening. After the wagon left, the quiet returned, but it felt altered, less watchful, more aware. That afternoon, Jonah worked on clearing a section of land near the barn. Eliza joined him, handing tools, keeping pace without trying to impress. At one point, Jonah stopped and looked at her, really looked, as if something had finally aligned. "You don't flinch," he said. Eliza raised an eyebrow. "At what?" "At the work," he said. "Or the waiting." She considered that. "I've learned that waiting doesn't mean standing still." That evening, Thomas asked if he could help Jonah tomorrow. For real this time. Jonah agreed, and the pride that crossed the boy's face was quiet but unmistakable. Later, as dusk softened the edges of the land, Jonah and Eliza sat on the porch steps. No talk of the future, just the sound of insects waking and the last light settling behind the hills. "I used to think loneliness kept me safe," Jonah said suddenly, "that if I didn't reach for anything, nothing could be taken from me." Eliza did not rush to answer. "And now," he watched Thomas inside, showing Lillian how to stack books into a crooked tower. "Now I think it just kept me alone." The lantern flickered to life inside the house, its glow steady, unremarkable, and completely new. But even as warmth settled in, Eliza felt the faint pull of unfinished things. Letters unanswered. Roads that still remembered her name. Staying, she knew, would soon require more than hope. It would require choosing, again and again, to be seen. The choice arrived quietly, the way the hardest ones often do. Not with urgency, but with persistence. It came in the form of a letter. Eliza found it tucked beneath the door one morning. The paper creased from travel, the ink faint but careful. No return name on the outside. Just her own, written in a hand she recognized instantly. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from memory. She did not open it right away. The house was still. Jonah and Thomas had gone out early to check the far fence. Lillian sat at the table, humming to herself as she arranged smooth stones she collected near the creek. Eliza slid the letter into her apron pocket and set about the morning as if nothing had changed. Water drawn, bread cut, floor swept, but the paper weighed more with every step. It wasn't until midday, when the sun stood straight overhead and the world felt briefly paused, that Eliza finally unfolded it. She read slowly. Once, then again. The letter was from her sister's husband, a man who had never quite forgiven Eliza for leaving after her husband died. He wrote that work had opened up farther south, that there would be room for her and the children, that family should stay together. The words were polite, reasonable, heavy with expectations that no longer fit. Eliza folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket. She sat very still. When Jonah returned, he noticed the stillness first. He had come to recognize it. "Everything all right?" he asked. Eliza didn't answer right away. She handed him the letter instead. Jonah read it once. Then he handed it back without comment. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "I know," Eliza replied, "but I owe myself honesty." They sat on the porch, the boards warm beneath them. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint sound of Ruth Calder's cattle somewhere in the distance. "I've moved before," Eliza said. "Every time, it was because staying meant shrinking. I told myself leaving was strength. And now," Jonah asked, "now I don't know if leaving would be courage," she said quietly, "or fear wearing a familiar coat." Jonah nodded. He did not reach for her hand. He let the space remain what it was, earned, That night, Thomas asked a question that surprised them both. "Are we staying here forever?" he asked, staring into the fire. Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jonah answered instead. "I hope so," he said. "But forever isn't decided all at once." Thomas considered that, then nodded. "I like helping here," he said. "Things make sense." Lillian leaned against Eliza, already half asleep. The next morning, Eliza walked the land alone. She traced the fence line. She knelt by the garden bed where green shoots had begun to push through. She stood at the rise where the road curved away, the same place she had watched wagons disappear before. She imagined leaving, the packing, the explanations, the children learning, again, how not to ask for too much. Then she imagined staying, the work, the uncertainty, the effort of becoming known. By the time the sun dipped west, the answer had settled, not loud but firm. That evening, Eliza burned the letter in the hearth, not angrily, deliberately. She watched the paper curl and fade until nothing readable remained. Jonah stood beside her, silent. "I'm staying," she said, "not because it's easier, because it's truer." Jonah swallowed. "Then so am I," he said, fully, no half-doors. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The land, once again, seemed to take notice. But commitment, Eliza knew, invites testing. And the land had one more lesson to offer before it would truly accept them. The test came with the season turning, as it always does. Quietly at first, then all at once. Winter did not announce itself with drama. It arrived through shorter days, through frost that lingered longer on the fence rails, through the way the animals leaned closer to shelter at dusk. Jonah noticed the signs early. He always had. But this year, the weight of preparation did not sit on his shoulders alone. They worked together, not perfectly, not without missteps, but with an understanding that grew stronger through use. Eliza learned the rhythms of the ranch, the hours when light mattered most, the corners of the house that trapped cold, the way Jonah fell silent when thinking hard. Jonah learned the small economies Eliza practiced without thinking, how she stretched meals without making them feel thin, how she turned mending into routine rather than burden. Thomas grew taller, not suddenly, but enough that Jonah adjusted the way he handed him tools. Lillian learned which chores were hers and which were not, and took pride in both. One afternoon, a storm rolled in faster than expected, snow-driven sharp by wind, the kind that erased distance and direction all at once. Jonah was still out with the horses. Eliza stood at the door, scanning the white blur, her jaw set. Fear rose, familiar and unwelcome, but it did not take over. She pulled on her coat, wrapped her scarf tight, and stepped out. She did not go far. She didn't need to. Jonah emerged from the storm moments later, face raw with cold, but eyes clear when he saw her waiting. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The door closed behind them, firm and final against the wind. That night, as snow piled high against the walls, they sat together by the fire. The house creaked. The storm pressed and tested, then slowly lost its force. In the quiet that followed, Jonah spoke. "I used to think survival was a goal," he said. "Just getting through." Eliza looked at the children asleep on the pallet nearby. "And now I think it's building something that lasts longer than fear," he said. Spring came late, but when it arrived, it came honestly. Green pushed through where the garden had been turned. The fence stood straight. Ruth Calder's wagon stopped more often, sometimes with news, sometimes with nothing but company. One Sunday evening, neighbors gathered at the house. Nothing formal, just shared food and longer shadows. Eliza watched Jonah laugh, really laugh, for the first time, not loudly, freely. Later, when the guests had gone and the stars settled into their places, Eliza stood on the porch, listening to the land breathe. Jonah joined her. "You ever regret staying?" he asked. Eliza thought of the road, of the letter, of the latch She had almost lifted one last time. "No," she said. "Some days are hard, but they're ours." Jonah nodded. "That's enough for me." The camera pulls back slowly now. The house lit warm against the dark. The fence stretching outward, no longer a boundary, but a promise kept. The wind still moves across the land. It always will. But now it carries names, and it knows where to stop. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt frontier stories. And if a moment stayed with you, share it in the comments. We're glad you're here.